Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Define Disaster. This is Battlefield 1. In today's video, we're going to be covering everything we know about tanks in the upcoming Battlefield game. That is, the changes that have occurred from Battlefield 4 to Battlefield 1 regarding tanks, as well as all available information regarding the basic tank mechanics of the upcoming game. Now, not yet do we know everything regarding Battlefield 1 or tanks in Battlefield 1 for a matter of fact. We've seen a snippet of what Battlefield 1 has to offer. We've seen one map, we've seen a few select weapons and a few select players playing the game from a few select perspectives, using of course only a few select vehicles. But we do have a basic idea and quite a lot more information regarding tank warfare in Battlefield 1 than we did before the June 12th stream event. That of course most of this information is coming from. And to start the whole thing off, the first thing I want to talk about is the different tank classes. As far as I know, are first in the Battlefield series, tanks are no longer going to be equal to tanks. Yes, in Battlefield 4, we had kind of main battle tanks, and then we had anti-aircraft tanks or anti-infantry vehicles. We had those kind of three distinctions, but we only really had one main tank. Well, in the next Battlefield game, we're going to have three main battle tank types. We're going to have light tanks, medium tanks, and heavy tanks. And besides, obviously, their armor and armament that is going to differentiate these tanks, the most important thing is the amount of players they can hold. While the light tank is obviously going to be a lot quicker than its medium and heavy compatriots and companions, it's going to only have enough space for one single player. That means it's a one-player seat tank with all weapons that the tank has available to that one driver. The medium tank is already a little bit larger. It's slower than the lighter tanks. It does have heavier armor and heavier armament, heavier weapons, but it also does sort of require three players to get the best out of the tank. So it's mainly kind of directed towards smaller squads. You, your friend, and his mate running this tank is going to be, of course, most effective. Yes, you can technically run it on your own. You can use all of these tanks on your own as driver, but as I will get into later, it in some cases will be highly ineffective. So the medium tanks are mainly made for three players. They can hold three players. With the heavy tanks, of course, holding even more players, 5 players that we already knew before the live stream. Those are going to be the hardest to kill, the slowest moving, but also usually carry the heaviest armament. But speaking of armament, another important point to note is that tanks are no longer going to all have the same guns. These tanks will be heavily different from each other, different speeds, different armors, different weaponry, and thus they will also have different strengths and weaknesses and will have to be combated in different fashions, be that from a tanking perspective or from an infantry fighting perspective. Regarding which tanks we will actually see in the Battlefield game, they will be showing up on your screen now. We've only had 3 tanks that we've actually seen up till this date, 3 confirmed tanks. That's not to say that there won't be more, but as for now, all the tanks we know are the Renault FT, being the light tank, the Mark V, the British tank, the one we saw in the initial gameplay reveal trailer, and the A7V, the heavy tank. That's a German tank that we'll be seeing in plenty of gameplay today. So up to now, we've seen 3 different tanks, 1 French, 1 British, 1 German. But if I would have to wager a guess, I think we will be seeing a few more for the final release of Battlefield to add even more spice to this already much more interesting armor gameplay in the next Battlefield title. Now, another change in Battlefield 1 regarding tank mechanics when comparing it to the previous Battlefield title is what I like to dub localized destruction. While you used to have kind of weak points on enemy tanks, for example, in Battlefield 4, getting a rear shot on a tank does almost double damage. You can do up to 52 damage to an enemy tank when shooting from behind. This is once more changed up a little bit in Battlefield 1. While you do have still those weak points, and I'm not quite sure if that is the side or from the back, but you do have weak points, you also have more prevalent effects of hitting those weak points. In the case of Battlefield 1, the example we've been given up to now is that if you take out your enemy's tracks, you hit your enemy's tracks, they will actually be immobilized. That will have an effect. So if you hit your enemy's right track, they will no longer be able to drive with their right track unless, of course, they fix that damage with the new and improved repair system that we will be getting into in just a little bit. Moving on then to destroying tanks. Now, in Battlefield 4, we always had a tank wreck, a tank carcass after we destroyed a tank. Once you would kind of shoot that, it would disappear after a while. You could just drive into it with an armored vehicle and it would blow up. However, as far as we could see from the footage that we had in this live stream event, and this may also just be because it's an early beta of the game, tanks, once destroyed, completely disappear. They usually leave a big crater in the ground because of the dynamic destruction that we have in Battlefield 1, a topic for a different video. But as far as I can see for now, we don't actually have tank carcasses. However, my guess is this may still be added to the game, given other kind of more realistic destruction that has been added to Battlefield 1. But for now, as far as we know, tanks will no longer leave kind of big humps of metal in the way. When it comes to destroying tanks, however, how to do it, as far as we know, currently there are a number of different ways. We have anti-tank grenades, which you will see plenty of in today's footage that you will be seeing while listening, of course, to me narrate over all of this. We've got special sniper ammunition, which means you can do damage with your sniper rifle. However, it won't be doing a lot of damage, and it is, of course, giving up your capabilities against infantry or your effectiveness against infantry. That's been confirmed for Battlefield 1. So I don't know how effective this is actually going to be. We'll have to wait and see until we get kind of an example of how this will work. We've also got the anti-tank rifle, I believe, for the assault class. Yet to see that in action as well, but that is going to be one of the main ways of also taking out tanks, and possibly not yet seen but believed to be in the game, dynamite. Other tanks, of course, are going to be a danger to your tank. And last but not least, we know there's going to be trip mines in the game, yet we do not know if those are only geared towards infantry or if they will also do damage towards tanks, be that light, medium, or heavy. Now, another change from Battlefield 4 to Battlefield 1 is going to be that the driver of the tank no longer necessarily has the strongest weapons available to him. To kind of encourage team play, we've seen that in medium and heavy tanks sometimes. Some of the armament, the better armament, the strongest weapons that the tanks will carry will be available to, for example, the secondary or tertiary gunners. Now, the example we can pull this information from is the Mark V. We saw some gameplay from the driver perspective and the gunner perspective in this June 12th event, and we saw that the gunners actually have the control over the main cannons on the left and right of the Mark V tank, whereas the actual driver of the tank has something that looks like a heavy machine gun, but likely isn't going to be very suited against heavier armored targets, more geared towards taking out infantry. Now, I think this is a very interesting switch up from the last Battlefield game. It'll encourage further teamworks and make tank gameplay once more much more reliant on team play to be fully successful, because if you're not communicating with your gunners and they have access to your main weaponry, which is going to be responsible for defending yourself against both infantry and other foreign tanks, you're going to find yourself not being successful without that necessary communication. Now, another change I alluded to previously was the change of repairing in Battlefield 1. You no longer repair your tank from outside. You don't have to get out of your tank and make yourself vulnerable to enemy fire, but instead can repair your tank from within. However, when repairing your tank, you cannot use any other weaponry. You cannot move your tank. You are completely immobile, and it takes a while. So if you, for example, repair your tank, I believe it was said 8 seconds, you get a chunk of health back, maybe, for example, 10 health. So repairing tanks will take a little bit longer, will not be able to be done during combat, which is a god bless, because let's face it, facing enemy tanks that were constantly getting reps in Battlefield 4 was not only completely illogical, but kind of also a little bit of annoying. If you have like 3 or 4 reps, you have basically an invulnerable tank, a tank that can shoot at you but can't be destroyed because he's repaired faster than you can do damage to him. So this is a welcome change. Also means that gunners aren't going to have to put your life on the line too often to help their squad mates in keeping a tank running. I think it's a great idea. It may kind of bother some people because it's not quite as realistic. For example, if your track's broken, technically you would have to get out of your tank and repair your track. But this is, after all, a game. And as such, it's definitely a welcome change in my opinion. Further changes include the animations. You have to get into your tank, which actually has animations now in Battlefield 1. Now, this makes you vulnerable. You can't use your weapon while doing so. And not only is this realistic, but it also means that people won't be hopping into and out of tanks too often anymore. For example, you're about to kill somebody, they've got 5 HP, and then an enemy vehicle drives by and they just quickly press E and hop in, as in Battlefield 4. That's not going to be the case anymore. It'll take them time to get in the vehicle, and you'll still have the opportunity to shoot them while doing so. On the other hand, getting out of tanks also has, while not having necessarily an animation or kind of a drawback, it takes a longer amount of time to bring up your weapon after exiting a tank, which is good because it means people won't no longer be able to kind of jump out of tanks and surprise kill you if you were trying to use your dynamite to kill your tank, or if you were an infantry fighter using anti-tank grenades. In other words, once you're in a tank, you're stuck in a tank unless you're in safety and you can safely get out of your tank. Getting out of a tank during combat to kill kind of a close infantry that your tank can't take care of is unlikely going to be an option in the future Battlefield game. Now, last but not least, regarding the changes that we know about and the new mechanics we know about per Battlefield 1 and tank warfare in this game, is that tanks, or the engineers, will have their own class. Now, not engineers being their own class, but tank drivers, vehicle drivers will be their own class. You will have your own weapons, either singular or plural, we don't yet know, and own gadgets available only to you if you spawn into a tank. Now, that is not to say you can no longer get into a tank that you see on the battlefield, but the driver, who of course has to usually take the tank from deployment, will, when spawning into this tank, be equipped with a tank gear, a tank loadout, a tank class, which has its own weapons and advantages and drawbacks. And it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in the game, what weapons and gadgets that this specific class exclusive to tank drivers has, and how that kind of plays out in general in the wider scheme of Battlefield 1. Now, if you have any more questions regarding Battlefield 1 and tanks, feel free to leave them down below. Is there information that I missed out? Probably there is. Feel free to share it down below in the comments. I'd love to know what you found out about the upcoming Battlefield 1 game. Are you as excited about the future Battlefield game as much as I am? Feel free to leave it down below. But otherwise, I would like to thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next Battlefield 1 video.